had been planning a solo camping trip for months. Work had been draining me, and I needed a break from city noise, blinking notifications, and endless traffic. I didn't want a crowded campground or a scenic overlook with a gift shop nearby. I wanted isolation, just me, the woods, and silence. I picked a stretch of backcountry forest in the Appalachian Mountains, several miles from the nearest trail. I had found the area on an old hiking forum, where someone mentioned a ridge above a place called Dead Man's Hollow. It wasn't a real trail, it was more of a suggestion. No maps marked it, no signs. The guy in the forum had gone on about how peaceful and untouched it was. That sounded perfect. I left on a Thursday morning, packed light but smart. I had my ultralight tent, sleeping bag, small gas stove, dried food, water filters, compass, and backup batteries. I didn't plan to stay more than 3 days. I parked my car near a Forest Service road, where the dirt met a rough footpath leading into dense woods. The first day was peaceful. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. I could feel my shoulders relax. The trees swallowed the noise. Just wind in the branches, birds chirping, and the crunch of my boots on dry leaves. I followed the terrain uphill, pushing toward the ridge. It wasn't easy. There was no real trail and the slope was steep. But by late afternoon, I found a flat patch halfway up where I could set up camp for the night. I pitched my tent, boiled some water for freeze-dried chili, and sat by the small fire I made. It was calm. No bugs, no animals sniffing around. I went to sleep early, but I didn't sleep long. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, just something that didn't belong. I lay there, holding my breath, listening. Then I heard it again, crunching, slow and steady, like footsteps. They came from uphill above my tent. Then they stopped. I waited. Nothing. I figured it was maybe a deer or some other animal passing by. Still, I stayed awake longer than I wanted, ears straining in the silence. I finally dozed off sometime after 2. The next morning, I made coffee and oatmeal, shrugged off the sound from the night. Animals move around at night all the time. It was nothing. I packed up and continued my climb up the ridge. By noon, I reached a wide clearing near the summit. The view was incredible. The land stretched out forever. I could see valleys, more ridges in the distance, the hollow below that gave the place its name. Felt ancient, unspoiled. I set up camp again, this time farther from the treeline so I could keep an open view. I even built a better fire ring with rocks I gathered. Felt like the perfect spot. I stayed up late watching the stars. I didn't hear anything strange that night, but when I woke up, I noticed something off. About 10 feet from my tent, there were scuff marks in the dirt. Not boot prints, not animal tracks, just places where the pine needles had been brushed aside in a straight line, like someone dragged something heavy. It went from the trees to behind a boulder and then stopped. I walked the line, looking closer. The trail was old, maybe days. Could have been a bear, I told myself. Maybe something rolled downhill, but it didn't sit right with me. I felt watched, though I couldn't see anything. I didn't want to move camp again, not after hiking all day. So I decided to stay, but I kept my hatchet close and slept with my headlamp around my wrist. That night, it rained lightly. The sound on my tent was comforting, and I managed to sleep straight through till morning. The ridge was damp and misty when I unzipped my tent. I stepped out to stretch and saw it right away. Footprints. In the mud. They were human. No shoes. Bare feet. Deep, clear impressions going from the trees to the edge of my camp, circling around the fire pit, and stopping directly at the back of my tent, right where my head had been all night. I froze. I checked my surroundings. No movement. Nothing out of place besides the prints. But I couldn't explain them. No one should be up here. I hadn't seen another person in 2 days. This place wasn't on any map. It wasn't even on GPS. I didn't even eat breakfast. I packed everything quickly, shoved it all into my pack. I left the tent poles and half my food behind just to make wait easier. I decided to head back down, stick close to the edge of the ridge to avoid the way I came up. As I hiked, the woods felt thicker. The trees seemed closer. I checked my compass often. I didn't want to get turned around. The sky was overcast, and light rain kept falling. My boots slipped on rocks. I moved fast. About 2 hours into my descent, I came across something I didn't expect. A torn tarp. It was caught in a tree branch, flapping like a flag. Blue, sun-faded. I climbed up to check it out. It wasn't mine. There was rope nearby, some frayed, old duct tape, a rusty pot. Someone had camped here long ago. It had all been left behind, torn apart, scattered. I kept moving. By late afternoon, I found a dry creek bed and followed it downhill. It should have taken me back to where I parked. But the farther I walked, the less familiar everything looked. Trees I didn't recognize, hills I hadn't seen before. I pulled out my compass again. It didn't move. The needle spun, then got stuck pointing the wrong direction. I tapped it. Nothing changed. I tried my phone, but there was no signal. Just a black screen where the GPS should be. I felt that weight in my gut. Fear mixed with frustration. I wasn't lost. Couldn't be. I had planned everything. Triple-checked. Marked bearings. But something was off. Either I'd turned myself around, or the land had played tricks on me. The rain picked up. I found a thick pine and crouched under it, slipping into my emergency poncho. I stayed there for about an hour trying to get my bearings. When the rain let up, I kept going. Just before dark, I stumbled on something that made my skin crawl. It was a campsite, fresh, maybe a day old. There was a fire pit with warm ashes, a rolled-up sleeping bag next to it, a water bottle half full, but no one was around. I looked closer. The bag was zipped shut, but no tent. No food, no pack, no clothes. Just the bag, bottle, and fire. I called out. Nothing. No answer. I didn't want to stick around, but curiosity made me unzip the sleeping bag. It was empty. I backed away and moved fast down the slope, not caring if I scraped my legs on brush or twisted an ankle. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I needed to get out of there. I found a dirt road just before nightfall. It wasn't the same one I had parked on. I followed it for what felt like hours until I saw a sign. Forest Service access? Gate 3B. I had no clue where I was, but at least it was something man-made. About an hour later, headlights appeared behind a bend. I flagged down the truck. A forest ranger. I must have looked like a wreck. Soaked, scratched, exhausted. He let me in without questions, just asked where I'd come from. I tried to explain, but the words didn't make sense even to me. He nodded like he'd heard it before. He drove me down to the main station where I could call someone. I gave him the coordinates where I'd left my car, and they arranged to have someone retrieve it. He offered me a cot in the back room and some coffee. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I told him about the footprints, the empty campsite, the broken compass. He just said sometimes, things get strange out there. Not everything has an explanation. I didn't argue. I haven't been back to that ridge. I don't plan to. I still hike, still camp, but closer to marked trails. I stick to places where I can see other people now, where I can hear distant voices or catch the occasional cell signal. Every now and then, I think about the person who left those barefoot prints behind my tent. I wonder if they were watching the whole time. I wonder if they ever left that ridge. And I wonder how close I came to never walking out. I've always enjoyed getting away from everything. I work in front of a screen all day, in an office that smells like burnt coffee and fluorescent lights. So once or twice a year, I load up my pack, lace up my boots, and head off somewhere deep, somewhere with no signal and no distractions. It's the only time I feel like I can think straight. Last fall, in late October, I decided to explore a part of the Cascade Mountains in Washington that I hadn't been to before. I'd studied the topographic maps for weeks ahead of time and even talked to a few folks in an online backpacking forum about the best routes. There was a lesser-known area west of Lake Wenatchee that people said was beautiful and isolated. That sounded perfect to me. I planned a 4-day solo trip. The weather was supposed to be clear, cold at night but dry. I parked at a small pull-off along a forest road that wasn't even marked on most maps. My plan was to hike about 12 miles in, set up camp near a small alpine lake I'd seen on satellite images, spend 2 nights there, and head back out the same way. The first day went smooth. It was cold, probably in the mid-40s, but I was moving and that kept me warm. The trail was narrow but easy enough to follow. It wound through thick evergreens, the ground carpeted in layers of wet pine needles and moss. I passed no one, not a single person. It was exactly what I wanted. I made it to the lake by late afternoon. It was smaller than I expected, maybe only a couple 100 feet across, but the setting was perfect. Pines lined the far shore, their reflections broken only by the occasional ripple of wind or bird dipping down for a drink. I found a small clearing near the water and set up camp. My tent went up without a problem, and I boiled water for a simple freeze-dried meal as the sun slipped behind the ridgeline. That night was quiet. No wind, no animals scurrying around, just the occasional creak of trees as they settled in the cold. I fell asleep quick. The next morning, after oatmeal and coffee, I decided to do a bit of exploring. I had no plans to hike far, just a few hours out and back. I brought my day pack with water, some snacks, a compass, and a map. The area around the lake wasn't heavily marked, but I spotted what looked like an old, overgrown trail heading northwest, opposite the direction I'd come from. It wasn't on any map, and that should have been my first warning. But it looked like it had been used at some point, maybe by hunters, maybe by old logging crews decades ago. Curiosity got the best of me. I told myself I'd follow it for an hour, tops, then turn around. The path was rough, overgrown, uneven, and full of deadfall I had to climb over. But it was exciting, the kind of thing I used to dream about when I read survival stories as a kid. I kept thinking it might lead to some hidden meadow or a forgotten cabin. At first, the trail was easy enough to follow, but the deeper I went, the more it faded. I kept pushing forward, thinking maybe it would clear up again ahead. Didn't. After about an hour and a half, I realized I hadn't seen anything that resembled a trail in a while. I looked behind me, trying to see the way I'd come, but everything looked the same. Dense forest, layers of fallen leaves and moss, trees leaning at odd angles, and nothing that gave me a clear path back. I pulled out my compass and map. I knew the lake was southeast of where I started, so I aimed to backtrack that way. I moved slowly, trying to retrace my steps, but after 20 minutes I had to admit I was lost. I wasn't panicked yet, but I was worried. I still had plenty of daylight left, maybe 6 hours or more, so I kept moving. I tried to follow natural landmarks like fallen logs or rocks I might have passed, but they all started to blend together. I marked trees with broken sticks or scratched bark with my knife, hoping that if I had to loop around, I wouldn't double back. By late afternoon, I still hadn't found the lake. I was exhausted and knew I had to make camp before it got dark. I didn't want to hike in the dark and risk an injury. I found a small rise, cleared a spot, and set up a makeshift shelter with my emergency tarp. I boiled some water and ate another freeze-dried meal. It didn't taste like anything. That night, the cold cut through everything. I hadn't brought my full sleeping bag, just a lightweight liner for the day hike. So I curled into myself, layering all my clothes and tucking the emergency blanket over my legs. I didn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time. Every twig snap made me jolt upright. I kept thinking about bears, cougars, or worse, falling asleep and not waking up at all. When the sun finally rose, I was stiff and shivering. I knew I couldn't do another night like that. I needed to get back to my main camp or find the trail I'd come in on. I walked in what I thought was the right direction for hours, but it was like the forest just kept shifting. Nothing looked familiar. My map was useless without known landmarks, and the compass could only tell me which way I was going, not if it was the right way. At one point, I found a small stream. I remembered seeing one on the map that led down toward the forest road where I parked, so I decided to follow it. It ran east for a while, then curved south. That felt promising. I drank from it using my filter and kept walking. Around midday, I slipped on a slick rock while trying to cross the water. I caught myself but twisted my knee bad. I could still walk, but not without pain. Every step sent a dull throb up my leg. That's when the panic really started creeping in. I stopped walking as much and started listening more. I thought I might hear traffic or maybe even voices, but the only thing I ever heard was the wind through the trees, birds, and the occasional sound of something larger moving through the underbrush. Likely deer. That second night was worse than the first. I didn't have the strength to build a proper shelter. I curled up at the base of a large tree and tried to conserve body heat. I'd rationed my food, but I was running low. More than the cold or the pain, it was the not knowing that got to me. Not knowing if I'd ever find the trail. Not knowing if anyone even knew where I was. I'd left an itinerary back home. Sure, but it was vague. Just the name of the general area and an estimated return date. No one would think to come looking for me yet. And even if they did, I was miles off any marked trail. On the third day, I followed the stream again. I limped, each step making my knee worse. I focused on finding high ground whenever I could, hoping to spot something familiar. That afternoon, I climbed a steep slope littered with loose rocks and thin soil. I thought maybe from the top I'd see the lake, or the road, or something man-made. Instead, I saw endless forest. No roads, no structures, just trees and ridgelines as far as I could see. But then I noticed something, barely visible through the trees, maybe a mile away. A straight line cutting across the forest. Could have been a logging road. I scrambled down the slope, slipping a few times but not falling. I aimed straight for that line, bushwhacking through thick brush and tangled branches. My hands and arms were covered in scratches. My knee nearly buckled twice, but I didn't stop. Took hours, but I reached it. It was an old road, barely more than a double track, but it was man-made. I followed it for what felt like forever, and just as the light began to fade, I saw something ahead. A rusted-out truck, half buried in leaves and pine needles. Behind it, a hunting shack, abandoned but standing. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Dust, cobwebs, and the smell of rot. But it had a roof for walls and an old wood stove. I found a couple of half-burned logs and a box of matches that still worked. That night, I had warmth. I stayed there one more night. The next morning, I followed the road for a few more miles, and it eventually connected with the main forest road I had driven in on. I recognized it instantly. My car was still parked where I left it. I drove back into town without stopping. I didn't even change out of my dirty clothes. I just got in the car and drove straight home. It took me a few weeks to stop flinching at small sounds. I couldn't sleep without a light on for months. I told people I just got turned around for a day or two. Not the whole truth, but enough. The real truth, the whole messy thing, felt too big to share. I still go camping now, but I'm different. I plan better. I leave exact routes. I never leave the marked trails. And I never follow old, forgotten paths, no matter how curious I am. The forest doesn't care about curiosity. It doesn't care about you at all. I've always liked solo camping. There's something about being completely alone out in nature that makes me feel more grounded, more real. I live a pretty quiet life, nothing too exciting, and being alone in the woods is where I feel the most alive. No traffic, no phones, no small talk. Just trees, wind, and silence. That's what I was looking for when I planned a weekend camping trip deep into the national forest about 3 hours from where I live in Oregon. It was early October, and the weather was just cold enough to make the nights feel crisp without being miserable. I packed light but smart, sleeping bag, tent, food for 4 days just in case, water filter, a first aid kit, and a hunting knife I always carried even though I'd never had to use it. I chose a trail I'd never tried before, one that didn't even have a name on the park website. I found it from a forum post by a guy who said it led to an old fire lookout tower that had been decommissioned years ago. He posted a few blurry pictures and said it was a good spot to camp because no one ever went that far. That sounded perfect to me. I left early Friday morning and reached the forest entrance by 9 a.m. The road leading up to the start of the trail was just a dirt path, barely visible, with a rotting sign that had probably once had the trail name on it. I parked my car off the side of the path, locked everything, double-checked my backpack, and started hiking. The air smelled sharp and clean, the way it always does in the woods. The trail was narrow and overgrown in spots, but it was manageable. There were no signs of other hikers, no boot prints, no litter, nothing. Just how I liked it. The hike to the tower was harder than I thought it'd be. The elevation gain was steady, and the trail got steeper the farther I went. The trees grew closer together, too, and I had to push through some thick underbrush more than once. Around noon, I stopped to eat a protein bar and drink some water. The silence was absolute. No wind, no birds, no rustling. Just my breathing and the crunch of my footsteps when I got moving again. I reached the lookout tower around 4 p.m. It sat on a small ridge surrounded by thick pine trees. The structure was still standing, though the wood was gray and splintered from years of exposure. The metal ladder leading up to the cabin looked solid enough, but I didn't want to risk climbing it. I set up my tent a little ways down the slope on a flat patch of dirt between two large boulders. From there, I could see the ridge and the top half of the tower. I made a small fire, ate a freeze-dried meal, and watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. It was peaceful. That night, I slept hard. I woke up sometime around 3 a.m. to a sound. It wasn't loud, just a soft crack like a stick breaking underfoot. I lay still in my sleeping bag, listening. There was no wind. I thought maybe an animal had wandered through, but I couldn't hear any footsteps after the first sound. No rustling, just stillness. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was nothing and went back to sleep. The next day, I woke up feeling rested. I spent the morning exploring around the tower. The door was locked or stuck, and I didn't feel like forcing it. I didn't need to go inside anyway. The air was colder than the day before, and there was a dampness to everything, even though it hadn't rained. I figured I'd stay one more night before heading back the way I came. That afternoon, I hiked farther out past the tower, off the trail entirely, just to see what was out there. The terrain sloped downward into a narrow ravine. I followed the ridge for maybe half a mile before finding a clearing where the tree cover opened up. That's when I saw it. A small structure. I wouldn't call it a cabin. It was more like a shack, just 4 wooden walls, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, and a roof made from what looked like sheet metal and tarps. It was tucked against the slope, mostly hidden by the trees. It didn't look abandoned. The wood was aged but not rotting, and there were no holes in the roof. Something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. I didn't go any closer. I just stood at the edge of the clearing and stared at it for a while. There were no signs of smoke, no tools or garbage outside, no footprints. Just the shack sitting there like it had grown out of the ground. I felt something in my gut I couldn't explain, like I was trespassing, even though there were no signs or fences. I turned around and hiked back to my camp. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that shack. Who built it? Why out here? There weren't any nearby roads. I hadn't seen another person since I started the hike. I told myself it didn't matter, that some old hunter or survivalist had probably built it years ago and forgotten about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there recently, and that they hadn't wanted anyone to find it. Around 2 a.m., I heard the sound again, a soft crack, then another, closer this time. I sat up in my sleeping bag and held my breath. The fire had burned down to just embers, and I could barely see outside the tent. I heard something brushing against the outside of the fabric. Not a paw, something heavier, then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun came up, I packed my gear fast. I didn't eat. I just wanted to get out of there. I kept looking over my shoulder as I hiked, half expecting to see someone following me. But the woods were empty. After an hour or two of hiking, I realized I wasn't on the same path I'd come in on. The trees looked different, the slope was wrong. I should have been going downhill, but the trail kept leading upward. I checked my compass and tried to correct, but something wasn't right. Every time I thought I was heading the right way, the terrain looked unfamiliar. I kept going, figuring I'd eventually hit the main trail again. That's when I saw the shack. Not the same one. This one was smaller, and it was right there, maybe 50 feet off the trail I was following. This one looked worse, collapsed roof, one wall leaning in like it had been hit. I hadn't seen it before, and I definitely hadn't passed it on the way in. I felt cold all over. I didn't go near it. I kept walking, faster now. I don't know how I ended up near that shack again, but I didn't want to see another one. But I did. Around midday, I passed another structure, bigger this time, made of metal. It looked like an old shipping container that had been dragged out into the woods. The door was shut. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. By the time it started getting dark, I still hadn't found the trailhead or anything familiar. I was exhausted and scared in a way I hadn't felt before. Not panic, just a steady dread that kept growing. I had no cell signal. My GPS app wasn't working. I turned in so many directions I didn't know which way was out anymore. I set up camp on a flat patch of ground between two fallen logs. I didn't make a fire. I didn't want anyone or anything to see me. I didn't sleep that night either. In the early morning, I started hiking again. My feet hurt, my legs burned, and I was out of food. I was filtering stream water just to stay hydrated. I kept moving west, using the sun as a guide, even though the clouds made that hard. Every tree looked the same. Every sound made me freeze. By the fourth day, I saw something that made my knees buckle. It was my own boot prints, not fresh ones, faded, but mine. I recognized the tread, the path they took. I followed them for an hour and ended up right back at the fire tower. Couldn't believe it. I hadn't even known I was circling. I just stood there, staring up at the tower, shaking. Something was wrong with this part of the forest. I don't mean in a supernatural way, but in a real, physical, dangerous way. I think someone or more than one person lives out there, hiding, building structures, creating false trails, maybe trapping people like me. I don't remember much of the next day. I walked like a ghost. I barely ate. I didn't sleep. I kept moving west. I stopped thinking about why I was still out there and focused only on putting one foot in front of the other. On the morning of the sixth day, I heard something I hadn't heard in days. An engine, distant but real. I ran toward the sound like a wild animal, crashing through underbrush, scraping my arms on branches. And then I saw it. A Forest Service truck, parked at the edge of a fire road. A ranger was standing beside it, radio in hand. He looked up, saw me, and froze. I must have looked like hell. I collapsed in front of him and couldn't stop shaking. He asked me something, I don't remember what, but he led me to the truck and gave me water. I rode back with him to the ranger station in silence. They never found my car. I told them exactly where I parked it, even showed them on a map. But it wasn't there. The trailhead was gone too. Trees had grown in like the path had never existed. They asked if I'd seen any buildings or cabins. I said no. I don't go camping anymore. I still love nature. I still go on short hikes near town. But I don't go deep. Not where no one else goes. Not anymore. Somewhere out there in that forest someone lives. Or maybe many people. They don't want to be found. And they don't want you to leave once you find them. I was lucky. Next time, someone might not be. I decided to go camping alone in northern Idaho during early September. The weather was cooling down, but the days were still long, and I'd read that this part of the forest near Priest Lake was beautiful this time of year. I'd done solo hikes and campouts before, but nothing more than a night or two at a time. This time, I planned to stay for 4 full days. I had packed carefully, checking everything twice. I brought a tent, sleeping bag, food and bear-proof containers, extra clothes, rain gear, first aid kit, GPS, backup maps, compass, flashlight with extra batteries, even a signal mirror just in case. I wasn't new to the outdoors, but I wasn't an expert either. I'd say I was somewhere in the middle, smart enough to prepare, dumb enough to go alone. I drove up from Spokane early in the morning, parked at a small, unmarked trailhead I'd found on a blog. Supposedly, it led to a lesser-known ridge overlooking the lake, about 8 miles in. I wanted quiet, and this seemed like the perfect spot. No other cars were around. I double-checked that my truck was locked and made a mental note of the gas level. The first few miles of the hike were peaceful. The trail wasn't maintained, but it was clear enough to follow. Pines and firs lined both sides, and sunlight filtered through the canopy in thin lines. I passed a few sets of old boot prints, but didn't see or hear a single person. It was exactly what I'd wanted: silent, calm, and isolated. After about 4 hours, I reached a small clearing with a slight slope and a flat spot that seemed perfect for camp. There was no fire ring, no trash, no signs of recent campers. I set up my tent, unpacked, ate a protein bar, and sat back to take it all in. The forest was alive with sound, birds, the occasional cracking of twigs, wind in the trees, but nothing out of the ordinary. I marked my location on my GPS and tucked the device back into my pack. That first night, everything went fine. I made a small, controlled fire in a portable stove I brought, heated up some freeze-dried stew, and watched the stars for a while before climbing into my tent. I listened to an audiobook on my phone until I drifted off. The woods were quiet, and I slept straight through. The second day, I hiked further up the ridge without my heavy pack. I followed a game trail that led to a higher overlook. From there, I could see Priest Lake stretching out below, framed by mountains. It was beautiful, and I sat for a long time just taking it in. I didn't see any signs of humans, no boats, no other hikers, no planes, just miles and miles of forest. Around midday, I turned back. On the way down, I noticed something strange. A pile of small rocks stacked in a perfect cone right beside the trail. It was about 2 feet high, balanced almost too well. At first, I thought it was a cairn, but it wasn't marking anything. It was tucked away behind a tree, barely visible unless you stepped off the trail. I took a closer look and saw that the rocks weren't natural to this area. They were lighter in color, almost chalky, and the way they were stacked didn't seem casual. Each layer was a perfect circle, like someone had spent a long time on it. I didn't touch it. I didn't like how it made me feel, like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I kept walking, faster this time, and didn't stop until I reached my camp again. That night, I kept thinking about the rock pile. I tried to tell myself it was just some backpacker with extra time. Maybe some kind of art. People make weird things in the woods. Still, I barely slept. At around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I didn't hear anything right away, but something had pulled me out of sleep. I sat up, heart pounding, and unzipped the tent flap a little. Everything was dark. No wind, no animal sounds, dead silence. That was what got me. The silence. During the day, the forest was alive with noise, but now it felt like someone had hit mute. I held my breath and listened. Then I heard it, faint footsteps. Not an animal. Slow, careful, like someone trying to be quiet. I stayed still. The footsteps were outside my camp, maybe 20 feet away, moving parallel to the tent. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't have a weapon, just a small knife, more for food than defense. The footsteps stopped, then started again, moving back the way they came. Eventually, I didn't hear them at all. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat there in my bag, knife in hand, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I got out and checked around the area. No prints, no trash, nothing out of place. I considered packing up and heading back, but I told myself it was probably a deer. Maybe I imagined it altogether. I spent the third day close to camp. I didn't go exploring. I collected more water from a stream nearby, filtered it, and did some journaling. I tried to enjoy the day, but I was on edge. I kept hearing small sounds, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, always just out of sight. I never saw anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I built a larger fire in the stove and kept it going longer. I didn't care about conserving fuel anymore. I didn't listen to anything or read. I just sat there, staring into the trees. As soon as it got dark, the sounds stopped again. Not like before, it was a clean cutoff, like the forest was holding its breath. I stayed up as late as I could, until around 1:30 a.m., then crawled into the tent. I laid there, eyes wide open, every sense on alert. This time, the footsteps came closer. They started softly again, just like the night before, but then they got louder, bolder. Whatever it was just outside the tent. I could hear breathing, slow and steady. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Then something touched the side of the tent. Not hard, just a light brush, like fingers trailing across the fabric. It moved slowly from one corner to the other, then stopped. I don't know how long I laid there, but eventually the sounds faded again. When morning came, I didn't wait. I packed everything in a rush, threw my gear into the backpack, skipped breakfast, didn't care how organized I was. I just wanted out. I took the fastest route back to the truck. I didn't stop to rest or eat. My legs burned and my pack dug into my shoulders, but I didn't care. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I'd see someone following me, but the trail was always empty. When I reached the truck, it was exactly where I left it. Nothing was touched. I threw my pack in the bed, jumped in, locked the doors, and started driving. I didn't relax until I hit the highway and saw other cars. When I got home, I tried to forget about it. I didn't tell anyone, not because I thought they wouldn't believe me, but because I didn't know how to explain it. Nothing actually happened. I didn't see a person. I wasn't attacked. I had no proof, but something was wrong in those woods. I felt it in my bones. A few weeks later, I started doing some research, not just about Priest Lake, but that general area. I came across a post on an old outdoor forum, buried in the comments. Someone had camped a few miles from where I was. They mentioned hearing footsteps at night, seeing strange stacked stones, feeling like they were being followed. No one had replied to the post. That was enough for me. I haven't camped alone since. I still go hiking, still spend time outdoors, but I always go with someone now. I don't know who or what was out there. Maybe it was just some backwoods person messing around. Maybe someone living off-grid, protecting their space. But I've never felt that kind of fear again, and I never want to. Whatever was walking around my tent those nights, they knew I was there. They knew I was alone. And I think the only reason nothing happened was because I left when I did. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed one more night, and I don't ever want to find out. It was mid-September when I decided to go on a solo camping trip in the mountains of Montana. I'd spent the last few years hiking and camping in various places, but this time I wanted something more isolated, far away from people and distractions. I had found a loop trail in a remote part of the state that was supposed to take about 4 days to complete. It passed through thick forests, climbed to a few ridges, and looped back around through some valleys and streams. It was listed as lightly trafficked, and I figured it would be exactly what I needed: quiet, peaceful, and undisturbed. I planned it carefully. I had all the gear I needed: tent, sleeping bag, food for 5 days, water filtration gear, GPS, map, compass, extra batteries, a hunting knife, bear spray, and a compact emergency beacon. I even left my full itinerary with a friend back home. Everything was in order. I drove out early on a Tuesday morning, parked at the remote trailhead lot, locked up the car, and set off with my pack just before noon. The first day was uneventful. The trail wound through thick woods with tall pines, lots of underbrush, and the occasional clearing. I hiked about 10 miles before stopping at a flat spot near a creek to set up camp. There was no one else around, and I hadn't seen a single soul all day. The air was crisp. The sounds of birds and the distant rustle of leaves filled the air, and I felt good, clear-headed. That night, I slept well. The second day started off the same way, peaceful, with only the sounds of nature keeping me company. I climbed higher into the hills, following the trail as it wound upward and leveled out onto a ridge that offered a wide view of the valley below. I stopped to take it all in, had a snack, and moved on. That night, I camped on the far side of the ridge in a narrow clearing surrounded by dense trees. That's when things started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious. I just had this feeling I wasn't as alone as I thought. Could have just been nerves, or maybe the way the trees seemed to press in from all sides. But as I sat eating my dehydrated meal by my tiny camp stove, I kept thinking I was hearing movement in the woods. Quick, sudden rustling, like someone stepping on dry twigs and then stopping. I turned my head sharply a few times, shined my flashlight around, but never saw anything. No glowing eyes, no animals darting off. Nothing. I figured it could have been a deer or something smaller. I was in their home, after all. I forced myself to ignore it, crawled into my tent, zipped it up tight, and lay still. Took a long time to fall asleep. I woke up once, sometime in the middle of the night, because I thought I heard something moving around the campsite. I didn't open the tent. I just lay there with my heart pounding, gripping my knife inside my sleeping bag. After a long while, the noise stopped, or maybe I just drifted off. I woke up to daylight and everything seemed normal. Nothing had been moved or taken. Still, I packed up faster than usual and hit the trail early. Day 3 was where it all started to unravel. I was supposed to hit the far point of the loop by early afternoon and then start the long turn back toward the trailhead. But after several hours of hiking, I noticed something wasn't right. The trail wasn't matching up with my map. I hadn't taken any turns or detours, just followed the main trail, but now the terrain didn't look right. I checked the GPS and it was struggling to get a lock. I waited a bit, adjusted it, reset it, and eventually got a reading. My location didn't make sense. According to it, I was miles off the loop, heading deeper into the backcountry instead of looping back. I checked the compass and confirmed I was heading south when I should have been going west. Somehow, I'd taken a wrong turn, but I couldn't figure out where. I had followed every marker, every blaze. There was no fork in the trail that I had noticed. It was like the path had shifted under me without warning. I stopped, spread out the map, and tried to reorient myself. I figured I could cut west off trail and rejoin the loop. It wasn't ideal, but I had a compass and some daylight left. I set a heading, marked a few landmarks, and pushed into the forest. That was a mistake. The forest off trail was thick and uneven, with dense underbrush and fallen trees. Every few minutes, I had to stop and double-check my bearings. Progress was slow. Then I noticed the silence. Not the kind of peace I'd felt earlier, but an unnatural quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my boots crunching dead leaves and branches. I felt watched again. The same unease as before, but stronger. I kept moving, glancing over my shoulder more than I wanted to admit. A couple of times, I swore I heard movement behind me, like something following at a distance. But every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. I didn't call out. I didn't want to hear an answer. After maybe 2 hours of bushwhacking, I came across what looked like a narrow game trail heading roughly west. I decided to follow it, hoping it would lead somewhere. The path was tight and overgrown, but at least it was a path. I walked for another hour before it started getting dark. I had no choice but to stop and make camp. This time, I didn't cook. I just ate a protein bar, drank some water, and set up my tent in a hurry. I didn't hang my food bag or anything. I just wanted to be inside. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing footsteps in the distance. Slow, steady, deliberate. I told myself it was just paranoia, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there, just beyond the tree line, watching. At first light, I packed up and started walking again. The game trail curved and twisted, and I couldn't tell if I was making any progress. My GPS wouldn't lock again, and my compass needle started acting strange, wobbling like it wasn't sure what direction to point. I tapped it, shook it, but it didn't help. That's when I realized I was completely turned around. Around midday, I found a clearing with what looked like an old fire ring, blackened rocks in a circle with some ashes in the center. It wasn't fresh, but it wasn't ancient either. Someone had camped here maybe weeks or months ago. I looked around for signs, maybe a direction they had gone, but there was nothing, just silence and trees. I rested there, trying to calm down, trying to think clearly. I decided I'd keep heading west, using the sun to guide me. I figured if I kept walking in the same direction, I'd hit a road or stream or something eventually. So I walked, and walked, and walked. By evening, I still hadn't found anything. No trail, no creek, nothing but endless trees and uneven ground. I felt like I was walking in circles. I set up camp again, exhausted, drained, and honestly starting to panic. That night, I barely slept at all. I heard noises again, closer this time. Sticks snapping, something breathing. I didn't move. I just lay there with my knife clutched in my hand and my heart thudding so loud I thought it would give me away. Morning came, and I opened the tent slowly, expecting something, anything. But there was nothing there. Everything looked normal. But a few feet from the tent, I noticed something new: boot prints. Human prints. Not mine. I had been there alone the entire time. The prints were fresh, from the night. They came up to the tent and stopped. Then they turned and walked back into the woods. That was the moment everything shifted for me. I wasn't just lost. Someone knew I was here. Someone was watching me, and they weren't making themselves known. I didn't waste time. I packed everything up as fast as I could and started moving. I didn't care what direction anymore. I just moved fast, trying to put distance between me and whoever had come to my camp. The day dragged on. I pushed myself harder than ever before, barely stopping to eat or drink. My feet hurt, my back was killing me, and my legs were like lead. But I didn't stop. The woods seemed tighter, darker, more oppressive, like they wanted to keep me in. Sometime in the late afternoon, I heard the sound of water. It was faint, but it was there, a steady trickling. I followed it, pushing through thick brush, until I found a narrow stream winding through the trees. Relief flooded me. Water meant I could follow it downstream, maybe to a larger river or even a road. I filled my bottle, filtered the water, drank deeply, and started walking along the stream. As the sun dipped low, I rounded a bend and saw something that made my knees buckle. A bridge. A real wooden footbridge crossing the stream, old but sturdy. Just beyond it, the faint outline of a trail sign. I had found a trail. I scrambled across the bridge, read the weathered sign, and nearly cried. It was part of the same loop I had started on, about 10 miles from the trailhead. I had somehow veered miles off course but managed to stumble back. I camped there that night, just off the trail, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel watched. The next morning, I hiked hard and reached the trailhead by late afternoon. My car was still there, untouched. I drove straight to the nearest town, got a motel room, and collapsed. In the end, I never found out who had been out there. Maybe a hunter, maybe someone living off-grid, maybe someone with worse intentions. I don't know.